The Stacked Income Protection Plan, or STAX, is a crop insurance product for upland cotton that provides coverage for a portion of the expected revenue for an area. Most often, the area will be one county, but it may include other counties or even practices as necessary to obtain a credible amount of data to establish an expected yield and premium rate. Producers may purchase STAX on its own or in conjunction with an individual insurance policy, also called a companion policy. The federal government will pay for 80% of the premium costs for STAX. STAX provides coverage for up to 20% of the expected area revenue in increments of 5, 10, 15, or 20%. Loss payments begin when area revenue falls below 90% of its expected level, although a lower loss trigger may be selected. Loss payments reach their maximum when area revenue falls to 70% of its expected level, unless the companion policy has a coverage level above 70%, in which case payments could end sooner. Like other area plans of insurance, the amount of coverage may also be increased or decreased by selection of a protection factor, so that growers may better tailor their coverage to their risk. The amount of STAX coverage depends on the expected yield, projected price, coverage range, and protection factor. The expected yield for STAX will be based on the historical average of yields in the county reported to RMA by insured growers. In areas where the yield data are thin, counties will be combined in order to accumulate enough data to determine expected yields and premium rates. STAX pays a loss on an area-wide basis, and an indemnity is triggered when there is an area loss in revenue. Let's use a non-irrigated cotton example with an expected crop value for the area of 558 per acre. So that's an expected yield of 885 pounds times a projected price of 63 cents per pound. Let's assume the grower also purchases a revenue protection policy with a 70% coverage level. This would be the companion policy. The grower selects a 20% STAX coverage range, so the range would be 70 to 90% of expected revenue. STAX begins to pay when area revenue falls below 90% of the expected level of $558. A maximum STAX payment would be paid when area revenue falls to 70% of expected revenue. The grower also has the choice to select protection factors. Those range between 0.8 and 1.2. This changes the amount of STAX coverage. So in this example, let's just say the grower chooses 1.2. The amount of STAX protection is the product of the coverage range, which is 20%, times the protection factor of 1.2, times the expected area revenue of $558. So in this example, the maximum amount of STAX protection is $134 per acre. The STAX protection is in addition to what is covered by the companion policy. STAX payments are determined only by area revenue and are not affected by whether a grower receives a payment on their individual or companion policy. It is possible for a grower to experience an individual loss on his or her policy but not trigger an area-based STAX payment, and the same goes vice versa. So we could have a STAX policy payment and not a payment on the individual plan. The STAX indemnity is calculated by multiplying the actual county or area yield by the harvest price to get actual revenue. Let's assume the actual yield is 650 pounds per acre and the harvest price is 63 cents per acre. The actual revenue is 410 per acre. A STAX revenue payment is triggered if actual revenue is 90% of expected revenue or lower. 90% of our expected revenue of $558 is $502. So an actual revenue of $410 is more than a 10% loss, and a STAX payment would be triggered. In this example, the STAX payment would be $111 per acre. In this example, the projected and harvest prices are the same. For the 2015 crop year, this is also the case for most regions. In a few regions, the difference is only 1 or 2 cents. To evaluate potential 2015 STAX payments, the actual county yield will determine if a STAX payment is triggered. In the example above, a STAX payment would be triggered if the actual county yield is 796 pounds per acre or lower. The maximum STAX payment would be triggered if the actual county yield is 620 pounds per acre or lower. So a useful analysis is to compare historical yields to the 2015 STAX expected yield for your county. Actual 2015 county data from RMA will not be published until later next year. But NASS does publish a state cotton yield. It does combine irrigated and non-irrigated yields, but a 2015 estimate has been published. So the historical RMA County yields can be found on the NCC website, and the 2014 yields will also be added soon. This chart shows an example of the NASS state yield, the RMA County yield, and the STACS expected yield for a non-irrigated county in South Carolina. You will notice a much stronger relationship between the RMA County yield and the state NASS yield if the county is predominantly non-irrigated or irrigated, as opposed to an equal combination of both. By looking at the chart, a producer could look at two useful pieces of information. One is how often does the RMA County yield end up being below the STACS expected yield? The other is to look at the 2015 NASS state yield and if it's highly correlated with the RMA County yield. You can get an idea of where the 2015 RMA County yield could fall. Now, of course, this is just a useful exercise and it's not intended to predict actual 2015 STACS payments.